Dash my buttons. Your life seems a grand one, if I may say. So full of adventure. How marvellous.
Adewale, the Jackdaw's quartermaster. Ed Thatch, Ben Hornigold, James Kidd.
Lock him in the hold and take everything that isn't nailed down.
We take as we please and become who we like. Self-made man.
But that look ain't you. It's not who you are.
Who am I then?
Edward!
Kenway.
Kenway.
Kenway! Caroline! Edward Kenway!
Have you heard of a place called the Observatory?
A place rumored to contain a tool of incredible utility and power.
Oh, such ambition.
It's everything you do out spy, Edward!
It's not spite that's driving me, Mary! It's courage! Come on!
My love, she came dressed all in white. Lowlands away.
This is it. This is the best one. Spoilers, but this is going top of the list. I've not played any games past Unity yet, but I'm not sure there's anything that's going to beat this one, so thanks for watching. For those who don't know, I'm currently playing through the entire, almost, Assassin's Creed series in release order, mostly so that I can see the evolution of the series play out, and so that I can see if my opinions of these games that I've not played since release still holds true, and to finally put together my definitive order of preference for the series. That said, Black Flag is the only Assassin's Creed game I've ever returned to, so I already know I'm going to enjoy this one. With this game in particular, I think it's important to look back at the reception of the series up until this point. Development on Black Flag started early in 2011, around 1 year after development on Assassin's Creed 3 had begun. Connor's story was allegedly always intended to bring the original trilogy to a close, despite that trilogy being 5 games long, but that's a different matter. Black Flag then was their chance to make something different, to change what it meant to be an Assassin's Creed game while still feeling familiar to fans of the series. Apparently they approached this game with the intention of making a fun game first and then adding the Assassin's Creed elements to it later on. While I can't find any discussions on this particular matter, this does lead me to believe that the sailing missions from 3 were likely borrowed from the work being done on Black Flag, rather than Black Flag making a whole game out of an Assassin's Creed 3 side mission. I think that design approach is important to keep in mind with this game, and I believe it encapsulates my overall opinion on it. This was made as a fun game in its own right, and then had all of the Assassin's Creed bells and whistles shoved in afterwards. Likely because of this, we got very little world building regarding the Assassins and Templars, with that whole conflict pretty much returning to the good versus evil tropes of the Ezio trilogy, with just another ancient artifact being the MacGuffin of the narrative. However, that's not really the main story here. The main story is about a man named Edward.
The name's Edward, in truth.
The overall story of Edward Kenway is portrayed in a way that reveals more about his backstory as we go on. When we first meet Kenway, he has that roguish charm or bad boy energy that makes the girls swoon and makes the boys either want to be his mate or to kill him straight away.
Fancy meeting a Welshman deep in Dago country. I'm English myself. I'm English myself.
I'm English myself. I'm English myself.
Shut your fucking gob or I'll fill it with shot.
He's got the confidence and the drive to get what he wants, but he's also happy to help out a mate if they're in trouble, as long as it benefits him, of course. Through various circumstances, Edward stumbles his way into the midst of an assassin and Templar conflict, accidentally handing over the location of various assassin agents to the Templars and learning about something called the Observatory, a treasure that the Templars are after and Edward fancies for himself. This then kind of falls to the background a bit as Edward gets more involved in the troubles of Nassau, a pirate haven set up by all the famous pirates you may or may not have heard of, who Edward just so happens to be good friends with. Turns out the British don't really want people setting up their own nations, so Edward and Chum set about trying to maintain their free land for free men. I do like this side of the story as it focuses on some of the best characters in the game, with this cutscene featuring Blackbeard and Bonnet being a standout favourite of mine.
All a big show. Give your quarry something to fear. Some hellish thing from a fevered dream. And men will drop to their knees, pleading for their lord before all else.
Oh, God. Looks fine.
Of course it does.
Hostages for Madsons! These were my only terms!
Yeah. 6 days of pure fucking silence. So I must conclude that you men are the pariahs of Charlestown, and I would profit better by using your organs for chum and your bones for char.
You hear that, Mr. Rags? My young friend returns with offerings and so saves your scrawny neck. Will you not thank him?
My problem with this side of the narrative is that Edward already knows who everybody is, so the characters get little to no introduction, and I was regularly left wondering who the hell these people are and how they fit into things. It was only on my most recent playthrough that I realised that Hornigold is the Templar that recognises your ship later in the game, after betraying the pirates and taking the king's pardon. I also had to look up his name just now, as he and many other characters just blend together in a mass of generic pirate accents. There's also the assassin storyline running even further in the background, so much so that it gets an introduction near the start of the game and then doesn't really come up again until the end. Edward learns that one of his pirate buddies is an assassin, and he's told that a map he gave to the Templars has revealed the location of their operatives. He is then slightly guilted into helping them out, which translates to 6 optional side missions that you have to tackle sequentially that unlocks a new set of armour. That's right, after being missing since Brotherhood, you once again have an unlockable armour set to work towards. In fact, maybe to make up for their absence, there are 2 armour sets to unlock. The only thing is, neither of them have a hood, which makes any cutscenes where Edward pulls up his hood makes him look like he's centering himself for meditation, or just has a nervous tic or something. Anyway, getting back to Edward, who is determined to find this observatory so he can claim the riches for himself. Gradually throughout the game, we are shown flashbacks of Edward back in England with his wife as he tells her about how rich he'll be after just a little bit of privateering. His wife's father thinks very little of Edward, and we come to understand that rather than just a shallow desire for wealth, Edward is fighting to keep his long overdue promise to the woman he loves, to give her a better life free of worry, and to shove it in her dad's face. This motivation keeps Edward driven arguably to a fault, as he gradually puts his own goals over the wants and needs of those around him. One by one, he watches his friends either die or abandon him, before he finds himself at rock bottom being taunted by an immortal Welshman. This is part of the reason why I still hold this game in such high regard. The focus of the story isn't some millennia-long conflict between shadow factions fighting over mind control devices. It's a character-focused narrative about a man struggling to overcome his own faults and find his place among others. About opening himself up to other perspectives and realising what's really important. There is also that millennia-long shadow conflict stuff too. Edward works with both the Assassins and the Templars to help him find the observatory, which involves locating Black Bart Roberts. Roberts turns out to be the latest incarnation of the Sage, the only living being who can locate and access the observatory. Upon learning that the observatory allows the user to see through the eyes of anyone on the planet, as long as they have a drop of their blood, Kenway then realises that this is too powerful an artifact for anyone to control, and so throws in with the Assassins to help keep the Templars away from it. Then, on top of all that, there's the modern day stuff, which I really am in 2 minds about. On one hand, I find it to be the worst modern day section in the series so far. We play as a research analyst working at Abstergo Entertainment. Desmond died in Assassin's Creed 3 and his remains have been harvested for DNA to be used in future entertainment products. In gameplay terms, this sees you walking around with your company tablet held up close to your face like a nervous person with a clipboard as people talk at you with varying amounts of cringiness.
Yar, matey.
Management starts taking interest in the memories you are unlocking, and the company IT guy starts blackmailing you into delivering data to the assassins, with that twat Sean working at a coffee shop and Rebecca as a courier. Skip here to avoid very minor spoilers on a 10-year-old game, but by the end of the game we learn that the IT guy, John, is actually trying to use your body to inhabit the spirit of Juno, who after saving the world and freeing herself from her temple prison, is now living in a computer, apparently. Turns out that John is a sage, as he looks exactly like Black Bart Roberts, which makes me think that the sages are Juno's husband, who in AC3 we see her trying to transfer his consciousness into a machine. This may have been explored further in future games, I just haven't got to them yet, so I'm just guessing at this point. These sections also allow you to hack into other computers, and you can scan post-it notes lying around the place. These notes seem to be the ramblings of some sort of cult, which I assume are dedicated to bringing Juno into a physical form, and I do find the idea funny that a cult dedicated to reviving an ancient spirit will leave post-it notes of their prophecy strewn about their place of work. The computers you can hack into add quite a bit of juicy world building for those willing to endure the walking around and hacking minigames to find them. There's some overly meta stuff here, like emails between employees about potential future games, like Ancient Egypt, Revolutionary Paris or Victorian London, but there's also some bigger picture stuff, like recordings of the first Animus experiments, or recordings of interrogations with Joan of Arc. Apparently there's also a lot more of Edward's backstory hidden here, like how he sailed under Blackbeard for a few years, but I couldn't find that, and I couldn't be bothered to drag myself through these sections to find them. And that's the dichotomy of these sections. There's good stuff to find here, but it's an absolute boring slog to get to. Not to mention the bit where you wake up in your supervisor's office after nearly being killed by the IT guy and given a verbal pat on the back and being sent off to do more work. It's all a bit weird, and I just wanted to get back to being a pirate. This also seems to suggest that the bleeding effect isn't really a thing anymore. In AC1, it was the reason we had to keep coming back to the modern day sections, and in the Ezio trilogy, they wanted to expose Desmond to it so he can learn the skills of an assassin quickly. Here though, I guess they figured out how to stop it, so they can literally pay people to spend 40 hours a week in an Animus and not have them all turn into assassins. As I mentioned earlier, it seems that Black Flag was designed as a pirate game first and an Assassin's Creed game second, so there's quite a bit of new stuff to get into here. Early on, you and some former prisoners and slaves take over a ship and name her the Jackdaw. She handles just like the Akia from the last game, except you can also throw explosive barrels out the back and you have mortar cannons mounted on the deck. Edward has a keen eye for detail, so through his telescope he can tell exactly how much of what resources any ship in sight is carrying. You pick your target, fire metal balls at them until they stop moving, and then board them. Successfully boarding a ship requires you to complete some other objectives. Smaller ships might require you to kill 5 crew members, but bigger ships will need more work. The bigger ships typically hang around the southern end of the map, and they might require you to kill 20 crew members, take out the captain, remove the scouts up in the sails, and then remove their flag. When the ship is yours, you get the loot. You can also sink a ship without boarding it, but you will only get half of the loot it was carrying. After a successful boarding, you can either use the ship to repair your own, or lower your wanted level, which I don't quite understand the connection there, but whatever. A few hours into the game, you establish your own little pirate bay, after which you can recruit ships to your fleet and use them in side activities later on, but we'll come back to that. The resources you acquire from these ships can either be sold for cold hard cash or combined with said cash to upgrade your ship. Like in AC3, this includes more armour, more guns, more cargo space, or better whaling equipment. Hunting returns from AC3 and is now expanded to include whaling. I've heard people say that these sections were a bit too much for them, and to a degree I can understand why. It's pretty graphic as the whales and sharks thrash around in their death throes before being hoisted out of the water with blood pouring out of them. But I think this was done deliberately to avoid being accused of glamorizing the act of throwing metal spikes into animals until they die. My biggest complaint about this feature is that I have to kill 2 humpback whales to craft 1 pistol holster, and I only get 1 bone from each whale. Come on guys, be more resourceful. I did enjoy the harpooning minigame, but it is by no means required. Ship-to-ship combat though is pretty much essential, though having said that, I'm sure there's somebody who's completed this game without firing a single cannon somehow. The weather system here does more than just affect the colour scheme of the world. Heavy rain usually brings high waves, meaning lining up a shot to arch over the waves to land them, or riding down a wave to cause your enemies to overshoot and miss you. Rogue waves can turn up at a moment's notice, which you have to hit head on to avoid taking damage. Cyclones can almost one-shot you without significant hull upgrades, and larger ships can pepper you with mortar fire while you try to line up your next shot. There's enough of a reload period between your shots to keep combat tense, and makes missing a shot enough of a punishment, but not so much as to become a hindrance. Once you get your big boy trousers fully equipped, there are also 4 legendary ships to tackle, which I've never managed to beat before. On my final stream of this game, I did manage to defeat 2 of them. One just uses a lot of mortars that don't highlight their trajectory, and another that can only be damaged from the back. I also had a go at this game's Ornstein and Smo, but didn't have any luck, and I think the last one is just a massive damage sponge. There are no Ubisoft towers to climb out at sea, so instead there are fortresses for you to conquer. These range from 1 star to 3, and each being equipped with a variety of mortar cannons and gun towers, and some will have other ships defending them. Once you take out all of the gun batteries, you can storm the fortress on foot, where you will find what I assume to be prisoners taking advantage of the southern lack of walls and fighting the guards. You will usually have to kill a couple of captains before taking out the commander in his office, and then the fort is yours and an area of the map is uncovered. The sea battle portion of these ramp up with difficulty and keeps them entertaining, especially as you can have enemy ships roll in and start getting involved, and again the weather can suddenly turn and create even more havoc. Once you're inside the fort though, it can feel like a bit of busy work running around killing an arbitrary number of captains before everybody else surrenders. As you progress through the story, you eventually unlock a diving bell, which allows Edward and his apparently massive lungs to explore underwater sections looking for treasure. As far as underwater sections in games go, I'd put this somewhere in the middle in terms of controls. It's more clumsy to control Edward in the water than it is on foot, but it's not as bad as something like, I don't know, Metal Gear Solid 2 springs to mind as a far worse example. There are air barrels dotted around to keep your lungs full, and you can hide from patrolling sharks in seaweed. Moray eels also hide in seaweed and will go for your throat if you get too close. Other than earning more money, these sections are also where various blueprints can be found, which are required to unlock the highest tier of ship upgrades. So anyone planning on taking on the legendary ships will have to do some exploring under the sea.
Under the sea.
That pirate bay I mentioned earlier could be directly compared to Ezio's villa from AC2, though you won't earn any money by upgrading it. The first upgrade installs a Harbour Master, where you can purchase and install practical and cosmetic upgrades for your ship, as well as selling cargo and buying ammunition. These are also dotted all over the game in most populated places, but having one in your home base is just an extra convenience. You can also renovate the tavern, another feature that can be found in several other places across the West Indies. Speaking to the barman will trigger a bar fight, which upon winning will allow you to chat to the barman to find out about high value ships floating around. You can also renovate a general store, which operates in exactly the same way as in AC3, allowing you to buy weapons and outfits for Edward, as well as buying animal skins for crafting. There's also a brothel to renovate and a campfire to install, which allows you to hire dancers and pirates for free across the game world, and these stand in for the courtesans and mercenaries from the Ezio trilogy. There are further upgrades to buy here, but they are purely cosmetic, and I think I only hired dancers once in my entire playthrough, and I know I never felt the need to hire pirate guards at any point. So arguably after unlocking the general store, you don't need to spend any more money here. Arguably the most important feature that this pirate den unlocks is the Kenway's Fleet side hustle. I mentioned earlier that eventually you can recruit successfully boarded ships to your fleet, and here is where they are put to use. You are presented with a map showing various routes to different ports. Each route will have a risk level which can be lowered by sending ships in to fight enemy vessels and make the way safe. You're given a percentage chance of success in these battles, and different ships will fare better than others. A bigger ship may seem the way to go up against 3 smaller enemies, but smaller ships tend to fire off rounds more quickly, so they will get in many more hits before you even fire off one shot. You can send up to 3 ships at once, and any damage they take in battle will need to be repaired for a cost. After each successful battle, you're rewarded with some diamonds, which are the currency used in this activity, and some random loot, which is required to undertake transport missions. The loot being random can sometimes be a pain in the arse, as you may require a certain amount of a particular resource to undertake a mission, and the only way to get it is to hope you get some after a fight. Successfully completing transport missions gives a hefty financial reward, and some will unlock new ports for you to sail to and some cosmetic upgrades for your ship. These missions play out in the background while you play the rest of the game, which is good because most of these will take several hours to complete. Apparently at the time of release, this was tied to a companion mobile app, which explains the separate currency and why it keeps telling me that playing with friends will let missions complete more quickly. Unfortunately, this app is now no longer available, but luckily the missions will still play out even when you're not playing the game. I used to think very highly of this side hustle, and it is still entertaining enough to play through and definitely worth the huge financial rewards for it. However, while currently playing through the entire series and having moved on to Rogue, other games have better versions of this, at least in my opinion, and I no longer think of this as the crowning achievement in Assassin's Creed side hustles. It would be nice to be able to skip the ship battles, but we'll have to wait until the next game for that little touch. Which I think just about covers everything that makes Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag an excellent pirate game. While the idea of repeatedly engaging other ships and clearing their decks to gain loot may sound like it would get boring fast, I just did not find that to be true at all. For me, the ship upgrades give me something to work towards and allowed me to take breaks from the story missions to just go and pirate around the place to get myself a sweet new set of cannons or stronger harpoons. Sailing around the world can be downright serene at times too. This isn't the prettiest game in the world, I mean it's turning 10 years old later this year, but when you're travelling across the seas to the sound of gentle waves and melodic sea shanties, it honestly relaxes me. It's a good mental place to be in, even if it is bookended by stabbing whales to death and massacring 20 people to claim their wood supplies. Everything I've covered really comes together to provide a full pirate experience, from the excitement and glory of battle to the quiet moments of freedom and serenity. Even just walking through island outposts, I found myself stopping next to taverns and listening to the bands play a song. The ambient sounds and music really can make you get lost in the pirate fantasy. And then there's the Assassin's Creed stuff, which is largely unchanged from AC3, and in some ways is actually more limited than most games in the series up to this point. Like Assassin's Creed 3, there are only 2 cities to explore here, Havana and Kingston. Both of these do feel different from each other visually, but they're both rather flat and repetitive landscapes that offer little in remarkable landmarks or points of interest. The map is littered with smaller outposts and island settlements, and most of these places will have some sort of collectible or side mission to take part in, whether that be assassin contracts or naval missions. Free running is pretty much identical to AC3, with lifts, corner swings and tea shop shenanigans all returning. You can also clamber all over the ships too, climbing over the sails and onto enemy vessels. Story missions are, once again, largely unchanged here, with the only new additions being tailing missions on your ship. It is pretty funny to be forced to remain hidden while following a ship in your equally large vessel, trying to stay out of reach of the very limited vision cones. These vision cones are fairly forgiving, so accidentally sailing into one of those doesn't necessarily mean an instant failure. Eavesdropping missions are back, hopefully for the last time in the series, and your Eagle Vision now lets you tag enemies, borrowing the system from the Far Cry series. This happens automatically when an enemy is roughly centered in your vision, and it allows you to keep track of your targets through scenery and terrain. This game did originally introduce the whistle to the series, allowing you to lure enemies towards a suspiciously melodic hedge or corner. This feature was retroactively introduced into the remaster of AC3 and Liberation, and is a positive step towards decent stealth mechanics. Now all they need is a crouch button, but someone told me that Unity finally introduces that, so I guess my waiting days are almost over. The lack of new mission styles is arguably forgivable when we consider the absolute heap of new stuff that this game introduces. However, one thing that I only realised after playing through the series is how stripped back the combat is in this game. In terms of melee options, this game has the most limited since the first game. You have your swords, wrist blades and fists. That's it. You do have some ranged combat options to compensate for this, with up to 4 pistols, the Sleep and Berserk Dart returning from Liberation, and the Rope Hook from AC3, though the latter isn't introduced until very near the end of the game. But considering AC3 gave us swords, daggers, tomahawks, clubs, and an extra heavy weapon slot, it seems daft to reduce that so dramatically for the sequel. I mean, AC3 had a weapon called the Pirate Axe. Why isn't that here? If I'm being honest, the counter-based combat has long reached the point where the only difference between weapons is the kill animations. But when I'm boarding my 7th galleon of the hour, I'd appreciate a bit of visual variation in my massacring. It wouldn't even require additional work, just copy the animations over from 3, it's all good, we won't mind. Which I think is all there is to say about Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, the only entry in the series that got a number and a subtitle. It's also currently receiving a sequel of sorts in the form of an ongoing webtoon, which seems like an odd thing to release for free, but with the end of the year marking the 10th anniversary of the original release of this game, I wonder if they're trying to build up a tension of the game prior to announcing a remaster or something? Wishful thinking, maybe, but I can dream. The version I bought on Steam also comes with the Avalyn mission, which is accessible from the main menu. What I had hoped to be a sort of expansion pack featuring Avalyn cruising around on her own ship turned out to be a single mission that lasted about 45 minutes. It was enjoyable for what it was, but there's nothing really significant to talk about there. As it stands, I do still rank this game as one of my all-time favourites, and without question I would put it at the top of my list of games in the Assassin's Creed series. I had more fun with this than any other game in the series so far, and by a significant margin spent the most time playing it. It's far from perfect and it fails to address some of the ongoing concerns with the series, but there's enough excellent content here to more than prop it up. I feel like if Ubisoft weren't so committed to releasing a new game every year during this time, or with making the game playable on 2 generations of console, then we could have had an equally developed and refreshing dollop of Assassin's Creed content to go with all the pirate stuff. The modern day sections really feel like it's stalling for ideas after losing Desmond, and they did step away from the moral grey area of the Assassin-Templar conflict in exchange for a much easier baddies want to control the world storyline. So that, at long last, is Black Flag. Next video, we're going to be having a look at Freedom Cry, which I probably could have covered in this video, but it's a standalone expansion being sold for about 15 quid, so for my money it deserves its own video. I'm streaming my playthrough of the series over on Twitch, so please do come and join me if you want to insult my opinions and or playstyle in real time. Or you can let me know how crap I am in the comments below and I'll read them while trying to bore myself to sleep.
Jesus, Addy, what the hell happened here?
You happened here, Edward. The damage you caused 6 years ago has not been undone.
I'm not an easy man to call a friend, am I? Is that why you're here?
To fight beside a man so driven by personal gain and glory is a hard thing, Edward. And I have come to feel the assassins and their creed a more honorable course. Have I been unfair?
No. For years I've been rushing around taking whatever I fancied, not giving a tinker's curse for those I hurt. And yet here I am, with riches and a reputation, feeling no wiser than when I left home. Yet when I turn around, look at the course I've run. There's not a man or woman that I love left standing beside me.
There is time to make amends, Captain.